Hello and welcome to the special author interview for FanFiAddict. I'm Frasier Armitage, part-time robot, full-time nerd, and joining me today is a fantastic author, one of the freshest voices in SFF. Her books are amazing. Linghun, I Am I, and her latest is A Palace Near the Wind. It is the incredibly experimental and fantastically brilliant Ai Jiang. Ai, how's it going?
I am doing well, trying to catch up in the new year on things that I have not finished in the past year. But thank you so much again for having me and for such kind words.
Oh no, it's great to see you. It's great. The last time that we saw each other in person was Worldcon last year. What has like the rest of your year been like, and the start of your new year? Are you happy with how it started 2025 so far?
I am glad that I've got a lot done. Last year felt extremely fast and extremely slow all at the same time. I think thinking back to everything that's happened in the past year, I can't believe how much has happened. But at the same time, I was like, I had so many things I wanted to do last year and none of them got finished.
I think it's really cool to still have things that you can carry into a new year. I think it gives you like a really good place to start because you think, right, I'm going to feel productive. But like last year, you won the Bram Stoker Award, you won the Nebula Award, you got nominated for a Hugo. Like, how do you top that like this year? It's like it's. I love that. I love your takeaway from last year is the stuff I didn't finish. When you had that happen, like it's it was amazing for you.
I think yeah, it was wild because I feel like it's like when you walk into a grocery store with your grocery list and you come out with none of the things on the list and come out with a completely different list. That is essentially how it felt like to me. Because I feel like, especially with writing, there are so many things that you can't control, right? Like getting a book deal, winning awards, things like that. They are out of your control. So those were very much like not on my grocery list, but they ended up on my grocery list as I walked out of 2024. And then the things that were in my control, like I was like, oh, I'm gonna try to finish 3 books that year, like writing 3 books that year, things like that. I came away not having accomplished it. So it's yeah, it's been a wild time.
Yeah, you came away with like champagne and you didn't manage to find any bread. It's fine. It's all good. You got it's nice to have champagne, you know? It's like
But I like bread.
it's very cool that you're getting to sort of like start the new year with all of these with like a clear goals and things. Are you happy with how it's gone so far in January?
I think I mean, it is still a little bit like 2024, where I had like a bunch of goals and then I did not complete those goals. I completed a completely different set of goals. But I think I am happy with generally how productive I have been. I think there can always be more productivity, but I can always rest more too because burnout is quite imminent. Can't English today. um But so far, yes. I think it's
Yeah.
been it's been going.
Yeah, I love that your English breaks down on the sentence when you're talking about burnout. That is so apt. It's like of all the times, it's like yes, and there's the proof. It's great. Um, one of the goals that you've got, one of the things that is on your list for this year is in April. A Palace Near the Wind is going to come out. How are you feeling about it?
It is a weird feeling, I think, because I had written A Palace Near the Wind like in its very first rendition in like 2021, I think. The first like 5 chapters of it or something. And then I'd finished it in like 2022. And since then, it went on to see like 8 different drafts before it finally went on submission. And I was just like, I feel like every time I'm just like, I'm so done with these books because you've read them so many times and you've done so much with it that you're just like, my brain is spinning. What is happening? Um, so yeah, so it's interesting because on one hand, it's like something I've written, but on another hand, it is from a time that I am no longer in anymore, from a person who I no longer am, kind of thing. So yeah, it's an interesting experience. I'm excited, but I'm also fearful at the same time.
Well, have you read it recently? Now that you know it's coming out this year, have you gone back and read it to see the difference between the person you were then and the person you are now?
Definitely yes, but then I am also the type of person who is like, oh, if it's like near publication or slotted for publication, I'm not gonna go in and like completely rewrite it to better fit who I am now, because then it's gonna be a completely different book that has been bought. You know what I mean? But also that's like I feel like I am happy with how it is based on how I've written it in the past. Maybe not as the person now, if that makes sense. That was very
You would write,
convoluted.
yeah, you'd write it differently now, but you're happy that you wrote it then. I guess
Yes.
that's a good way of putting it, right? Um,
Yeah.
so tell us what past I had on her mind when she was writing this. Tell us a little bit about what people can expect from A Palace Near the Wind.
So I had intended it to be kind of a meditation and exploration of nature versus industrialism, but not very specifically set in like a particular time period, whether it is, here now in Canada or like in China in the past, but more as like a philosophical musing of what it would be like if nature had come to life and we're in like a secondary world type of situation. And my initial idea had been kind of like a Bluebeard um exploration of this idea, but with a slight twist, which I won't get too much into because spoilers. um, yes. But then I feel like as I was writing too, even though it is not an anime I have finished yet, I saw similarities between A Palace Near the Wind and Attack on Titan. Not that it's comparable because Attack on Titan is like, this massive, huge, like amazing thing, and I am just me. But but in the sense that there is a wall and there are two sides of people on two sides of the wall that have a very different understanding of each other. I would just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I think it's a really good way of introducing people to the themes of the book because there are so many themes that you pack into this relatively thin book. Like it's not like a massively thick one, but it's full. It's full of things to think about, and it's definitely one to get conversations going. Um, tell us a little bit about the the um, ecological aspects of the book because your opening dedication is for Mother Nature and all her unwilling sacrifices. You said you set out to write an ecological sci-fi type of book. Did you have that dedication in mind before you started? Was that something that you came to afterwards? Sort of tell us a little bit about what that was like exploring that in your writing. I've asked you
So
about
I
six different questions then. Sorry, just pick one and go for it. Yeah.
no, it's okay. I will try. I might forget some on the way, but we'll roll with it. But I think much with like my short stories, with my long form too, I tend to have the opening in mind and the conclusion in mind. And I usually write the dedication before I write the entire book, which is very interesting, especially when like if things about the book change in terms of themes or the character, but like the general idea that I set out to do with the book, like the questions I'm trying to explore, remain the same, but the answers and how I go about exploring them might change, if that makes sense. So, with the ecological exploration in terms of Palace, I suppose I was really thinking about how nature is in like an unwilling contract with humanity in a sense, whereas a lot of other species kind of live in harmony with nature, follow like, you know, the specific food chain. I am not an environmentalist, friends. Do not fact check me. And no matter how much research I do, I won't be able to compare to academic, right? So that is why a lot of the times the things I write, even if I do research, I tend to take a more meditative or like philosophical approach rather than like a hard science approach, even if it is in the realm of science fiction, right? Like, for example, when I wrote I, similar, I am not a tech person. I will probably never be a tech person. I can read as much up on tech as I want, but I will still not have a full and comprehensive understanding as like an engineer might, right? As someone who works in tech. And I will always have like more of a layman's um, knowledge to it, and that is the perspective I write from. And I hope no one expects me to write from like an expert perspective, because that is not what they will get. Um, but yes, in terms of the ecological aspects, I have lost my train of thought.
It was a great train of thought. I was with you all the way. It was great. Um, the yeah, I feel like there's a really interesting commentary about the, you know, you said about that contract that nature has with humanity, and the way that you've given a voice to the other side of that contract, to the other side of that perspective, I think is really interesting. And I think that for anybody who reads it who is expecting cli-fi, they're going to find it wrapped up in a really interesting package here. But it's going to give them maybe a way to start those conversations about, you know, well, how are we treating the world? What is most important to us? Are you hoping that people get that from the book in some ways, or are you hoping that they get maybe a slightly different message about Mother Nature?
I think so. I think most of what I write, I don't want to give a very particular, like, oh, this is right, this is wrong type of thing. I want to more so spur thought or conversation based on the themes I am exploring, if that makes sense. Like in The Palace Near the Wind, we are very much focused on Li Feng's perspective, right? And she has a very narrow view of the world because of her background and because of her upbringing. And I feel like that it holds true for a lot of people, especially for me when I was growing up as well. And I think rather than having readers read her perspective and be like, oh, she thinks like nature is completely bad and that's what we should think from this book. I don't want people to think that, right? I want to I want people to think like past her unreliable narrative, if that makes sense, to kind of question what they have always held to be true and believed to be sound throughout their life concerning not just nature, but like the ways the world works in general, or like general values and beliefs they have, and whether or not that is truly something they believe or something they've been simply taught growing up and know like nothing better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really cool. Um, Speaking of Liu Feng and her perspective and her as a character, this is like the opening line of the blurb on the back of this copy of the book. The Feng people have bark faces, carved limbs, arms of braided branches, and hair of needle threads. Um, Tell us a little bit about how cool it was to write a main character who is basically like a tree come to life, like made out of bark, like a Pinocchio type character. How much fun was it diving into that?
It was very jarring because obviously I am not a tree. And it was very funny because originally, when I had first written it, I did not have the people of Feng look exactly like trees or be more like ant-like creatures. They were very much like more human bound, well, like human creatures that are nature bound, if that makes sense. But yeah, I don't know why it slowly evolved into trees. I feel like That is just the general direction the book took as I was writing and I was thinking about the themes. And I wanted a very strong sense of like defamiliarization with the human world in particular. And I feel like that could be brought out more if I was writing from like a completely different species than our own that experiences the world completely differently. But of course, I still have human biases going in. So I cannot be completely sure how a tree might think or feel, right? So a lot of our own cultures end up sneaking its way into these tree creatures. But I definitely had one of my friends, she was mentioning the different things that like a tree might feel or like react compared to a human, right? Things like sap instead of blood. I think I had blood originally, and then I was like, wait, trees would trees have blood? But anyways,
I think it's very cool. Having spent so long thinking about the perspective of a tree, do you look at trees differently now?
I think yes. I I don't know. I feel like I'm always that kind of person who's like looking at plants and like we always eat vegetables, things like that. You snip them, and then I'm just like, do they feel this? I feel kind of bad, but I also need to eat. Things like that, or like people when they're like carving things into trees. Does it feel like the tree is being tattooed, or elsewise? Things like that.
Yeah, you've got like some trees showing off their bark to other trees, going like, "Whoa, you got a new one!" It's like, yeah, all that kind of stuff. That'd be really cool. Um, in terms of trees, did you, when you started and these became sort of like, these evolved into them in your mind, did you have like particular trees for different characters? Did you have a picture in your head of what they might look like? And does that relate to like a real tree? Or was it just kind of like magical, mystical, sort of like Studio Ghibli style trees that were sort of like popping to life in your imagination?
Kind of like a mixture of all of them. Because so originally I was thinking about trees that are indigenous to China and like where I live or around like the region where I live. And then they slowly took on a very Studio Ghibli vibe because I love Studio Ghibli. So it is definitely a mix of both, I think, because especially with fantasy, I love works that are very wondrous and strange, like Pan's Labyrinth, Studio Ghibli, things that give off that kind of vibe rather than very wide sweeping epic fantasy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I'm the same. I will totally take a Studio Ghibli over an epic fantasy. I think that's what I loved about the atmosphere in this, is that it felt like that layer of fantasy. It didn't feel like it was going too deep, into sort of lore and all that kind of stuff. It was there, but it wasn't sort of like you're not reading 100 pages of the root system. You just
Hmm.
that they're trees, and I love that. I love it paints these pictures in your head. um with regard to sort of the the vibe as well, there's a great deal about family that there is in the culture of the Fung and in the culture of how it relates to the plot. And I can't really spoil it, but there's a lot to do with family within this book. And it got me thinking about some of your other books and how there's there's a lot to do with family in Linghun, and there's a lot to do with family in some of your other books that I know that are coming up from you sort of in the future. And it just got me thinking about, with experimenting and trying new things, do you find that having the theme of something that's so universal as family, does that help to ground you and the reader in some ways so that it allows you to experiment a little bit more with your writing, do you think?
I think yes, in the sense that there is less for me to kind of build in terms of character relationships and dynamics because they are very much catered to questions and thoughts I've had concerning my own family growing up, or like families I've seen around me, like cousins, things like that. Not like they're not very specific, as in like based on a specific person, but just like more general and broad questions based on relationships, their dynamics and tensions that I've had. So I do think with that in place, it gives me more room to focus on world building and um, exploring the themes in general. But it is also very difficult because this is a novella, and to know what to keep in and what to take out and how much to focus on specific things, right? I think this one was only my second novella, written shortly after I'd written Linghun. And it is my first fantasy novella. So, in terms of like how much world building, the pacing, things like that, it was still things I was trying to figure out, right? And I think it is very evident that I am trying to figure out in the book. And I often like to tell people that with each book I write, it is an attempt. It's not going to be perfect. I'm not the type of writer who will edit my work to death before I release it into the world. So it will be rough around the edges. And I think that will hold true for everything I write for the rest of my life. Just like me as a person, I will be rough around the edges for the rest of my life, and I'll continue trying to improve it, but I cannot be perfect, and that will just have to be okay, you know.
Hey, if this is you rough around the edges, where's the rough around the edges? This is an amazing book. It's fantastic. It's like, I love how you're here and you're like, oh, it's not how I'd write it now, and it's a little bit rough, and I'm sorry, guys. It's like, no, this is amazing. It's like, it's it's great. the I love the atmosphere that you created, which is kind of like this the palace atmosphere. So like this sea drama style palace where it's somebody who's like a fish out of water, who's just royal wedding and all this kind of thing. Did you when was that something you wanted to bring into the story, or like was that just something that just kind of happened as you were writing it?
So it was very funny because the original version of this novella was very much centered around the wedding. And there was not a lot of what came before and what came after. It was mainly just a wedding, and it was around like 25,000 words, I think the first draft was. Because I had come from writing a lot of short stories, right? And then with short stories, they're like, start as close to the climax as possible because you don't have that many words. And that is the mindset I had going in. But also, I actually wanted A Palace Near the Wind to be a standalone instead of a duology. So a lot of the things you see in the book, especially near like the last third of it, was added in afterwards. Um, yeah, so there were a lot of like twists and turns and things that were not original, like in the original version, in the standalone version, that got added in because it had become a duology. But that's another thing. I had never written like a series type of situation, so rough around the edges, ha ha. But I am excited. I feel like even though I make a lot of mistakes in my writing and probably take a lot of interesting turns, I am very passionate about writing and like the whole craft of it, even if there is a lot to improve, if that makes sense.
I love how humble you are, right? It's like you
I
got so
know.
many people who love your books, and you're just like, yeah, I'm getting better. It's like you won the Nebula and the Bram Stoker award.
I
You're allowed to say like, okay, my books are okay, they're pretty good. It's like
no, but like I feel like, oh, like I was saying, like awards are so uncontrollable. You don't know what will resonate with people when, and just because it resonated with people doesn't mean necessarily that the book is not rough around the edges.
that's a very good point. This book definitely resonated with me. I absolutely loved it, and you know I loved it. You know you can check out my review on FanFiAddict. You'll see that I love this book. Um, I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of your, this was like an early sort of I book. And I want to talk to you about sort of the different things that you've released, because you've released a horror with Linghun, you released a cyberpunk with I Am I. This is kind of like a sort of fantasy sci-fi book. Um,
Mhm.
what comes next, I? Because it's like you you kind of, you're not making like a lane for yourself. It's like you are writing so across so many different things, and it's great and it's so exciting. I love these genre blends that you're putting out. I think they're great. But do you feel like that brings its own kind of pressure to always be thinking of something new and something different?
I think yes and no. Like, no, in the sense that I don't think there is a particular author brand that has been made for me yet, if that makes sense, in like the publishing landscape, because I'm coming into it, like especially traditional publishing, quite new. And because I have not published more than one book really in a specific genre yet, there is no like very consistent label, I guess, that people have for me, at least not one that I'm aware of. Maybe there is, and I just don't know it. But I have heard people be like, oh, she is a horror writer. Oh, she is a fantasy writer. Oh, she is a science fiction writer. So yeah. But I also feel the pressure in that. I guess it's not so much like a public opinion pressure, but like a self pressure to succeed, I suppose, to always be like pushing the boundaries with my work and trying new things and trying more than what I have done with my previous works instead of like getting into a very comfortable lull. I suppose, like, oh, I write this specific way, it is comfortable for me and it seems to work, so I'm gonna keep doing it, but more like, I want to try this new thing. It might not work, it may not sell, but I want to try it. But I do want it to sell because I need to live.
I think the label that I would give to you is awesome writer. I think that it covers all your books. It's great.
Oh,
But you are kind of like transcending the idea of a genre writer, because you are like fearlessly tackling new things, and it's really exciting to see. I know as readers that's the kind of what we're craving right now. This always your going to be your approach to writing, or is this something that you've kind of come to as you've written more things?
I think so. It's funny because when I first started writing, I had very much that mindset that I had to follow in a very specific writer's footsteps that I was trying to emulate to be able to see the same success and critical acclaim as they have, right? I would do things like endlessly Google which Ultimator writers have come from and be like, I need to apply to that school because definitely if I go to that school, I will become like Ted and Toni Morrison. That's definitely how it works because that's what I've been taught growing up, right? That like, oh, if you go to like specific institutions, same as this person, then you will see the same success. Or it's like, oh, because this institution is very highly ranked, if you go there, you will succeed. Not true, obviously, right? But that is like my thought process before, but kind of it has definitely changed now, I think, where I've noticed that a lot of people who do win awards, who do become hugely successful, are not specifically trying to emulate anyone, and they were not setting out to write something specifically to win those awards, if that makes sense, right? It just happened that you wrote the book during the right time and the right people read it, and that is how awards happen, that type of thing, right? You can try to do award eligibility posts and try to broadcast what you want people to read as much as possible, type of thing. But how they respond to it is not something you can personally control, right? So I think after thinking a lot about that, I was like, I'm gonna just write what I want. If people resonate with it, then they resonate with it. At least I am having fun writing it. At least I will like what I'm writing. And I've definitely gone back and forth. It's like throughout the years as I've been writing and getting into trad pub and thinking like, oh, should I make something more sellable? Should I like tone down the experimental aspects or like the wild things I like to throw and attempt in my work that may or may not work? Like, I think the thing I just wrote, it's definitely not 3 acts. I don't even know how many acts it is. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20. I don't know. But like some people are not gonna like that, and that's completely fine. But then I'm having fun writing it, even though my head hurts. But
What
very
was the
long-winded.
what was the fun parts of writing Palace? What in your memory going back to 2021 and 2022, because I know that you went through so many drafts with editing it, but what was the fun parts that you remember of being like, oh yeah, this is clicking, this is working?
So I will tell you this, and this holds true for basically almost all my books, is that I remember almost none of the writing process, other than the fact that there was a lot of hair pulling, a lot of aha, a lot of I love this is genius, and then a lot of this is horrendous. Who's gonna buy this? And then another, you know what, this is not too bad. And then followed by, okay, this is as good as it's gonna get. It's not gonna get any better. It's okay, goodbye. So that holds true for everything I've written, I think.
I love it. I love that's a great writing process. I particularly love that. Oh, this is genius. I love that stage. I think that stage is great. It's
It's
like
very brief. It's very fleeting.
I think that there's a lot of writers out there who will hear that and be relieved to think that that's if that's your writing process, then that's okay to have a writing process like that. But yeah, but I feel like there must have been something that you were writing at the time and you thought, oh yeah, this is pretty good. Like even if it was just like the needle hair, that's like just that would be like. But yeah, I loved the way that the plot unfolds in this, and I can't say any more. I'm not going to ask you anything about the plot because I don't want any spoilers. But congratulations, because I was just riveted. Like every rug pull was just perfectly timed, and it was great. Um,
Oh, thank
so
you.
yeah. Um, in terms of the book, the art on the cover is awesome. And I know
Mhm.
that you really like the cover art as well. But this isn't the only piece of art that you've commissioned to go along with the book, is it? Can you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
more about the artwork that you've had done?
So they've just got off to printing. So I don't have the physical copies in hand, or else I'll like, maybe you can do that whole thing, where you like hold up your hand and it like pops up. I don't know if
I,
that's like
I wish I was that clever. It's like I have no idea how to do that. It's like
me either. I've always wanted to do one of those on TikTok. People be like, "This is what I read," and they go like this, and the book like appears. I'm like, no, I can't do that. I'll just be like, "This is what I read." Slaps the book on my hand. Editing failure, and you'll just see like weird chopping where it's like hand and then book. But so I got two pieces of art commissioned. One of them is actually by like a childhood friend of mine, who is doing visual art. So I commissioned a piece of art which is basically Li Feng in front of the palace confronting like the king for the first time. It is very gorgeous. I'm very excited for it. Pretend you see it here. You can see it on my website. But and then another piece is by a friend of mine. Oh wait, so the previous one by Nancy Zhang. That is the name of the artist. And then the second one, it is a map, but I had cut it into two pieces to try to entice y'all, trick y'all, into buying the second book, which is like basically the map of one side of the wall and then the other side of the wall. And it is by an amazing artist who is called David Bowman. And both of these will be available if you pre-ordered the book, and then fill in the pre-order campaign form on my website or like on my card. Just link in bio or whatever social media you're on now. I will probably be on there. But yes, you can fill it out and you will get these two pieces of art that I love so dearly.
Yeah, and they are definitely worth having because they are stunning pieces of art. I love again like the atmosphere that's in these pieces of art that you've had done, and just the atmosphere on the front of the book, and it really represents well the atmosphere that's in the book and the feeling and the vibes that you get as a reader, like the images it paints in your mind. And I think it's great that you've got such brilliant artwork to go along with it. I'm really excited about it for you. Was it
Me
your idea to
too.
do the commissions, or was that something that Titan wanted you to do? Or
So I commissioned them myself. It has always been a dream of mine to get like artwork commissioned for books, but then it is very costly and justifiably so because it takes a long time to make art. Because my mom's a visual artist herself, and she does very traditional paint on canvas type of work. She doesn't really do digital art. And like the time it takes for her to make one piece, I'm just like I cannot. I mean, I understand because I also did visual arts in high school and it takes like forever. So, but yeah. So I hope I can keep commissioning more art for like my works later on, and I'm very excited because like to see what the artists take from your work is very interesting. Like you give them kind of like the brief, right? What you think should go into the art, and then but they interpret it in their own way. So it's very amazing how that works.
yeah, it's very cool to see. And I love as well that, I know that the first time that we chatted, I think you had like posters of your covers above you.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, and on like the poster wall. So the fact that you've been able to get art commissioned, and because I know that art is really close to your heart, is really lovely to see as well from that side of things. Because I know that it's something you're so passionate about, and it runs in the family, obviously. So, yeah, it's very cool to see. And when I first got to see the artwork, I was just like, this is great. This is perfect. It's like I hadn't read the story yet, but I'd seen the artwork, and then when I read the story, I was thinking back to the artwork and thinking, yeah,
Mhm.
they smashed it. They did it really well. Um, tell us a little bit about, because you said that this is a duology. You've teased like the second part with this other part of the map. Um, tell us what you can about the sequel.
So it is hilarious because I had mentioned I wrote the first part or started to write it in 2021, finished it in 2022, and then it was sold in 2023. And the second part, to this day, has not been written yet. None of it. I mean, it is, I have a brief outline of what I have in mind, but I have discovered that whenever I write an outline, the book turns into something completely different. Or like the outline changes like 5 or 6 times before I write the actual thing. So I have a bunch of notes that I've been collecting for the second part since basically 2021 because I didn't know how much the book was going to change, what was going to get added, and what questions and like loose ends I would need to tie up in book two, right? So the synopsis and outline I had written like way back when I first sold the first book is not very applicable anymore, I think. um, so it'll be interesting. The goal right now is to finish like at least the skeletal draft of it by the end of February. Hopefully finish the whole thing by March and hand it in back to my editor. We will see. It's my ambitious deadline, but I'm very excited to see how differently the second book will read because I intend to write it from a different perspective as well. Because these two books were meant not as like to feel very much as like a continuation per se, but like a stark contrast to the first book. Because I intended the first book to be more whimsy, more fantastic. The second book to be a little more on the sci-fi side, kind of tackling nature versus industrialism in terms of like the machinery side, information technology, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's exceedingly cool that you get to go and write that book now. Like the I that is now gets to go and dip into this world again and gets to see the other side of the question, I guess, which is really cool. And as well, a lot of the if you think about the way that the world has changed, even in, cli-fi, with the things that have happened since 2021, 2022, and the impact that's had on the
Mhm.
environment, you've got so much more now that you can bring to the sequels. Whereas if I guess maybe if you'd written it back then, it would be very much of its time still. Whereas now it can be of this time. So I think it's
Yes.
very smart. So well done for not writing it until now. Now you just get to meet the deadline.
It'll be definitely very interesting because it's supposed to take um like the setting is on two different halves of a wall, right? And it is kind of like, when we live in different communities, one community is different from another, one country is different from another. And that is kind of what I want to explore, how one side of a wall can seem so drastically and vastly different from the other side, from not just like setting wise, but experience culture wise, and the way that information is exchanged and passed on.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the beautiful things. I remember when I read The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. It was recommended to me by a friend, and her very first sort of page is all about walls and the differences that
Mm.
walls can make. And even just that first page, still to this day, I still every time I see a wall, I think, okay, that's something to think about. Whereas before it was just a wall. And I think it's one of
Yeah.
those beautiful, beautiful metaphors that, it's so rich for exploration because, like you say, like the divide that a wall puts up is an incredibly interesting one to ponder. So I love that
Mhm.
you're tackling that in the sequel and you're going to be going the other side of things. And it all sounds really exciting. For anybody who is um wanting sort of like a very brief sort of like you know sort of pitch for what the book is like, this Palace Near the Wind, give us like 3 words that you would use to sum up Palace Near the Wind, and it can't be Palace Near
Oh.
Wind.
Like Google keywords.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Let me think. Strange. Um, Jarring
Hmm.
and hmm, whimsical.
Excellent. Yeah. Strange, jarring, and whimsical. That's
Yes.
great. That's great. And that is exactly the flavor of the book. I love it. Um, One thing I was going to ask you, because since the time that you wrote this, you've had a wedding of your own. Um, when you look back to like the marriage, the wedding that takes place in this book, um, if you were writing it now that you've been the princess and the bride of your own day, would you write it differently?
So I am actually working on a book now that is very much centered around marriages and marriage traditions from my hometown, and how it kind of compares to like more Western marriages, right? So I will not talk too much about that. I will leave it to that book. But that book, it is like a, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like dark speculative, I guess. Set between like 1940 to like 2010-ish, something like that. I need to go back. It is, the whole 10 act thing. It's whatever it is. um, yeah. So hopefully that will sell, and then you will see the differences
Yeah, I can't wait.
in
Can't
marriage
wait to read it.
portrayal.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. And I would love to know when it does. come back, we could talk about it. And I would love to know what Focus makes to it. That would be amazing. In terms of um, people who read the book, because it's out in April, so if you pre-order it now, make sure you fill in the pre-order to get the artwork for it.
The
Um,
art that you cannot
yeah.
see.
um, but where can people find you and find your socials and that kind of thing to let you know that they have ordered it, or to let you know their thoughts about the book when they read it?
So the best place to find me would just be my website, which is like my name and then .ca. And most of my social media handles, like Blue Sky, Instagram, what else is there? Facebook, Goodreads, everything is on there. So if you ever wanted to reach out to just like tell me your thoughts about the book, not to yell at me, please. I'm very fragile. You can reach out through any social media. I'm usually there, probably too often, and also not often enough at the same time anymore because life and goals, grocery lists that don't get completed. Yes, or I have like a contact form on my website. You can always shoot me an email. So, yeah.
That's awesome. And as I mentioned earlier, no fact checking. Nobody is allowed to fact check I. She's
Please
not
don't
the
yell at me. Be like,
yeah.
this is not scientific. Like, I understand. That's my science fantasy.
It's just stories, guys. It's just stories. It's all good. Um, but thank you, I. Thank you for joining me. It's so nice to catch up with you, and it's so nice to be able to just shoot the breeze with you about this book as well. I absolutely loved it. You know that I loved it. But yeah, it's great to be able to talk about it with you, and I can't wait for people to read it so that they can read the plot twists and be like, "Whoa, this is amazing!" So it's going to be great. But yeah, thank you for joining me, and all the best with the release.
No, thank you so much for having me again. And I hope everyone enjoys it. My rough around the edges attempt. And please buy the second book too, which will be also a rough around the edges attempt, but hopefully slightly less rough around the edges.
It does say like if you can just accomplish getting slightly less rough around the edges, you're gonna feel like such a success. It's like I love that that's your approach to writing. It's like you're not aiming for perfection, you're just aiming for like maybe slightly less rough. It's like I
I
love
feel
that.
like if I aim for perfection, I will never get anything published, and then I will not be able to feed myself with my work. So,
And then you will actually you will never be able to use a grocery list metaphor because you won't be able to buy groceries. So that's
yes,
exactly why we need to keep you in with the groceries so that you can keep on giving us these amazing years in ahead. So yeah, that's the way to do it. But thank you so much for joining me, I, and all the best.
thank you so much again for having me.